Hello students, welcome to this module on complex numbers and analysis as part of the course CHE 641 at IIT Kanpur. We are going to discuss part 5 of this module on complex numbers and analysis. Note that in complex analysis, a class of functions w equals f of z, where z is a complex variable. Z is a complex variable and w is a function of this complex variable f. Okay, there are a class of functions called analytic functions, which are very special, as I told you in the last lecture. Why are analytic functions special? Well, first of all, what are analytic functions? Analytic functions are those functions of w. If you think of f of z is a function of two variables x and y, because x is the real part and y is the imaginary part. Now in general you can trade these two variables to two other variables, to let's say z and z star, where z star is the conjugate of z. Okay, so in general if I transform w as a function of x, y to another function to these two variables, I'll get another function of z star. But analytic functions are those functions where w is a function only of z and not z star. That is, an analytic function means that partial w, partial z star should be 0. This is one way of thinking about analytic functions. Or the Cauchy-Riemann condition, which we derived in the last two modules, wherein if you think of w as u plus iv, partial u by partial x is equal to partial v by partial y, and then partial u by partial y is minus partial v by partial x. Okay, these are the two Cauchy-Riemann conditions that we discussed in the last couple of modules. So these are all equivalent. You can assume one and the other can be derived. That is, you can assume this, sorry about this, you can assume this and derive this, vice versa you can assume this and derive this. These are called the Cauchy-Riemann conditions. Okay, now why are analytic functions special? What is the big deal about analytic functions? As I told you in the last module, if I know that f of z is analytic in a given domain, suppose this is the, sorry about this, suppose this is the complex plane, right, and I have a domain, some domain where f of z is analytic. I know for sure that the derivatives are continuous and the function obeys the Cauchy-Riemann conditions and the function is single valued, then the function is analytic. So I know that, let's say this is analytic. Then you can show that all the higher derivatives of f of z in that domain are analytic as well. Let's call this the domain D, are analytic as well. The moment you know that you can find the function and its higher derivatives which are all analytic, which are well defined, that means that you can obtain a Taylor series or power series representation of the function about any point within the domain. Suppose you can write f of z is f of z naught plus f prime of z naught z minus z naught plus f double prime of z naught z minus z naught squared by 2 factorial plus so on. So is possible. Okay, we will return to shortly what happens when you have what are called singularities. That is, it is not always possible that the function is analytic in the complex plane. There may be some isolated points where the function has a singularity, and we'll see how these series can be generalized to include such singularities. We'll return to that shortly. But before that, I would like to contrast this scenario with what happens for functions of real variables. Suppose I tell you, sorry about this, suppose I give you a function, okay, like this. What is this function? F of x is mod x. This is real value. This is f of x, this is x. This is not the complex plane, this is just f versus x. So you know that there is no unique derivative at x equal to 0 at the origin, right? That is something that you are familiar with, right? Now if I give you one more function, instead of f of x is mod x, suppose I give you f of x is x mod x. What does this mean? This function means that this is x squared for x greater than 0 minus x squared for x less than 0. So this function, the first derivative of this function is 2x for x greater than 0 is equal to minus 2x for x less than 0. So here in this case, the function and its first derivative, sorry about this, and its first derivative are well defined at the origin at x equal to 0, right? But you know that you have the higher derivatives are, suppose I take the second derivative, it's 2 if I go from x greater than 0 is minus 2 if you go from x less than 0. So f double dash is not continuous. That is, in the theory of real functions, it is possible to have functions like this which are smooth and which have continuous first derivatives. However, the second and higher derivatives are not well defined, right? They are discontinuous. So you can keep generalizing this to other functions. Suppose I could say f of x is x squared mod x. Here the first two derivatives, f prime, f double prime, will be continuous, right? But higher derivatives, f triple prime, will be discontinuous. Now this situation will not arise if you have an analytic function. The moment you have an analytic function, this is very, very special. Analytic functions, analytic functions are very, very special, right? Because the moment, the moment you were able to define an analytic function within a domain, then all its higher derivatives are well defined. They are also analytic. So this is a very, very powerful result, okay, in the theory of complex variables, and you will see the power of this as we go along shortly. Now before I do this, let's quickly discuss the idea of a power series of a complex variable. Of a complex variable. Okay, suppose I have f of z is summation n equal to 0 to infinity a n z to the power n. This is a typical example of a power series where I am expanding about the origin z is equal to 0. I could also have written f of z is n is 0 to infinity a n z minus z0 to the power n, where the series expansion is about z is equal to z0. These are somewhat like Taylor series that we discussed a few lectures back, right? Now let's take this example where you are expanding about the origin. Let's think of z as r e to the I theta and the polar representation. Then f of z is nothing but summation over n a n r to the n e to the I n theta. Now we want to know when does this series converge? That is, if I add infinitely many number of terms, would the series converge? If it does converge, what is its domain of convergence? What is the region in the complex plane in which it converges? Okay, so in order to do that, I have to worry about, because it's a complex valued function, I have to worry about its absolute value, which is the modulus, which is nothing but a n r n e to the I n theta, right? Now e to the I n theta is bounded by minus 1 and plus 1, so its modulus is always less than or equal to 1, because e to the I theta is cos theta plus I sin theta, so both cosine and sines are bounded between minus and 1. So I need not worry about this because it's a bounded thing. So in order to think about the convergence, I have to just worry about this part, which is mod an, and then r is the real valued number because it's the magnitude of the complex number. So this series would be convergent. This series would be convergent if this is convergent. So we have to really worry about whether this series is convergent or not. Okay. Now, in order to do this, I will only briefly mention this. You can figure out what is called the radius of convergence of this series. What is meant by radius of convergence? R. Okay. Imagine you have let's say you have a series. Let's draw a circle. Okay. Now you find that there is a region R of radius R in which this series is convergent. Okay, the series converges. That is called the radius of convergence. In this domain, centered around, if suppose you are obtaining the series about some z naught, you draw the circle of radius r over which the series converges. That is the radius of convergence. How is this related to the coefficients of the series? So this is obtained. Okay, I'm sorry. This is z naught. Okay. This is obtained by the following formula. 1 over r is limit as n tends to infinity, where n is the coefficient index that's there in the series, mod an to the power 1 by n. Okay. Now when an become large as you go further and further in the series, right, as an becomes large, right, that means that here you are raising it as an becomes larger and larger, yeah, and then you are raising it to the power 1 over n. Okay, when an becomes larger and larger, then this 1 over r will become smaller and smaller, because 1 over r is just an addition of all these things. On the other hand, if an becomes smaller and smaller, right, this 1 over r becomes larger, 1 over r becomes smaller and smaller, or r becomes larger and larger, right. So this is the idea behind obtaining the radius of convergence based on the coefficients of the power series. Okay, so the series is convergent when mod z is less than r. Once you have found, if you have a series, let's say, right, if you have a series like this, which we started off with, right, now based on this formula you find the radius of convergence of the series. Okay, the radius of convergence of the series is obtained by this formula. Once you have found the radius of convergence, then you can say that the series is convergent for z less than r and divergent for mod z greater than r. This is the meaning of convergence and divergence. Okay. Now, if r goes to very large value, that means that the series is convergent over a larger and larger region in the complex plane. So let's look at an example, couple of examples to illustrate this idea. So let's take a series of the form n is equal to 0 to infinity z to the n upon n factorial. Okay, then 1 over r is nothing but limit n tending to infinity. Now the coefficients are 1 over n factorial here, So 1 over n factorial whole to the power 1 by n. Now what is n factorial? N factorial is n into n minus 1 into so on, right? As limit n goes to infinity, n factorial approaches n to the power n, because you are multiplying n minus 1 and so on. So in the limit as n goes to infinity, n factorial approaches n to the n. So 1 over n factorial will be limit n goes to infinity. This is the same as n to the minus n whole to the 1 by n. This is the same as limit n tend to infinity n to the minus 1, which is 1 over n. So as limit n goes to infinity 1 over n, this becomes 0. So 1 over r becomes 0 or r tends to infinity. That is, this is a convergent series over a large domain. Okay, for all complex valued numbers z, it is a convergent series, right? This is one use of applying this formula. Now let me take a new sheet. Suppose I take another example, second example, summation n equal to 0 to infinity n factorial z to the n. Then 1 over r is nothing but limit, same formula, I'm just applying the formula, n factorial whole to the 1 over n. As I told you, n factorial is proportional to n to the n. So n to the n whole to the 1 over n. This is nothing but limit n tending to infinity n, which tends to infinity. So 1 over r goes to infinity means r goes to 0. So this series is not convergent. This is not a convergent series. So this is the meaning of convergent and divergent series, right? Now let's take one last example. Summation n is equal to 1 to infinity z to the n. See, note the key change here. Here n was 0. Right? Note the key change here. Here n was 0. Here n starts from 1. Okay. Let's see what implication does it have on this. Now z to the n upon n. Okay. So 1 over r, as per the usual formula, is limit n tend to infinity 1 over n upon 1 over n. Now as n goes to infinity, this becomes 0. So anything to the power 0 is 1. So that means that the series is convergent if mod z less than r, that is mod z less than 1. So these are the ways in which you can check for convergence of the series. Okay, so this is a very important idea, how to write, because you know that analytic functions can be Taylor expanded or expressed in terms of power series. It is important to know the domain of its convergence. Okay, now before I go to the next topic, let me briefly clarify or expand upon a little bit on multi-valued functions, because this is a very important idea. So it's better to get it thoroughly clear in our minds. Okay, so let's take the case of ln z, the natural logarithm of z. Z is a complex number, so w is also a complex number. So this is ln r e to the I theta, right? This is the polar representation. But you know that e to the I theta can be written as e to the I times theta plus 2 n pi, because your e to the 2 n I times 2 pi is 1, because e to the 2 pi I is 1. Similarly, e to the 2 pi n I is 1, where n 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on. N is an integer. Okay. So this means that w is, if I use log of a times b is log a log b kind of a formula, get log r plus ln of e to the I theta plus 2 n pi, but this is nothing but ln r plus I theta plus 2 n pi. Now n goes from 0, 1, 2, 3 so on up to infinity. So this is an example of a multi-valued function. ln z is an example of a multi-valued function. In fact, it is infinitely many valued. ln of z is infinitely many valued. Now in many cases you want to keep the function to be analytic. That means that you have to restrict the function so that it takes only one value. This is called the principal value of ln z, which is denoted as capital Ln z. So this notation may change from textbook to textbook. Some books will use this for the multi-valued function and this for the principal value. So please be watchful. Plus I theta, that is choose n is equal to 0. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake here. ln z is equal to ln r plus I theta, that is choose n is equal to 0. The principal value of ln z is denoted as capital Ln z, and what this essentially means is that theta is restricted such that theta lies between 0 and 2 pi. It doesn't cross 2 pi, because then you will start getting multiple values for the logarithm. Okay, now let's take, so there is clearly one multi-valued function. The second example of a multi-valued function is t to the z, where both t and z are complex. Right? Now you know that ln t is multi-valued. Okay, so one representation for t to the z is exponential of z ln t. We know that a times log b is log of b to the power a. So this is basically ln of t to the power z, and exponential of ln of t to the power is t to the z. Okay, that's something that we know. Right. So this one is multi-valued because ln of t is multi-valued. So it's, if you take a complex number and raise it to a complex power, that is multi-valued. Now I'll take a simpler example. I'll take t as complex but n as real, integer actually, such that you are interested in t to the 1 over n. So this is the nth root. I'll use the same approach. I will write this as e to the exponential of 1 over n ln t. Okay, now ln t is infinitely many valued. So does it mean that t to the 1 by n is also infinitely many valued? So is t to the 1 by n also infinitely many valued? The answer turns out to be no, because it's very easy to understand this. You write t as r e to the I theta plus 2 pi k, where k is 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on. Okay, now therefore t to the 1 by n is exponential 1 by n. Instead of t I substitute this ln r plus 1 by n I theta plus 2 pi k. So t to the 1 over n is r to the 1 over n, because e to the something plus something is e to the something times e to the something. E to the 1 over n ln r is e to the ln r to the 1 over n, and e to the ln is just their inverses of each other. So I'll just get r to the 1 over n times exponential of I theta by n plus 2 pi k I upon n. Now how many values does this have? So k can go from, take all integral values 0, 1, 2, 3. So as it keeps on taking from 0, 1, 2, 3, you will get different values for t to the n, but all the way up to n to the n minus 1. If k equals n, then this term becomes 2 pi n I upon n. N cancels. This is just 2 pi I. So 2 pi I is e to the 2 pi I is just 1, right? Cos 2 pi plus I sin 2 pi. We know that that's 1. So you have only n distinct roots for t to the 1 over n, a complex number raised to the 1 over n where n is an integer. Okay, so that is something clear, because when k becomes higher than n minus 1, then all the roots will get repeated once again. So there are no distinct roots other than these n roots. Okay, so the roots will get repeated. Now, so there are three types of so we saw that there are multivalued functions of various types. There are some multivalued functions which are infinitely many valued. There are some which are finitely many valued, but in any case they are not very useful in analysis of complex numbers. So we have to somehow figure out a way of not encountering multivalued functions. So that is achieved by the notion of a branch cut. Okay, so to remind you again, an analytic function must be single valued. So many of these functions that we encounter, like z to the 1 over n, ln z and so on, they are not single valued, they are multiple valued. So how do I deal with such functions and somehow sort of make them single valued, right? So that is achieved by what is called a branch cut. But before you encounter branch cut, we have to understand what is a branch point. Okay, what is a branch point? Let's first understand what a branch point is. If z is varied in the complex plane such that the path forms a closed curve that encloses a branch point, then in general f of z will not return to its original value. I will of course give some concrete examples, but basically what we are saying is, suppose you have a complex plane and let's say the origin is a branch point, right? And let's say you want to, suppose I go around the origin. Okay, suppose I go around the origin. Now if I go around and come back to that same point, so I start here, I go around and come back, right? The function will not take its return to its original value, it will take a new value. That is the meaning of a branch point. Now let's understand this very clearly from the point of view of an example. One of the simplest branch points, the square root of a complex number, and z is r e to the I theta, right? So there are two things I'm going to do. I'm going to first draw the complex plane again. This is real, this is imaginary, right? Now I'm going to consider two contours, one about the origin and one elsewhere. The contours need not be circular, they can be anything, but just for the sake of simplicity I'm drawing circular contours. So this is, oops, sorry, this is the origin, this is some point z1, let's see. Okay, so here also I'm doing a counterclockwise, I'm circling this point in a counterclockwise way, same with this point. Now if z goes around this once, right? Now let's write this down. F of z is r e to the I theta, and z is also r e to the I theta plus 2 pi k, right? So f of z, so k is 0, 1, 2 and so on. When k is 0, f of z is r e to the I theta, so z is r e to the I theta, z is r e to the I theta. So f of z is simply z to the half, it's r to the half e to the I theta by 2. So as you go around, when theta in the z plane goes from 0 all the way to 2 pi, you will see this branch. Now imagine, now theta is just not theta, now you are done one full circle 2 pi and then you are starting off again. So z now becomes second round, z now becomes r e to the I theta plus 2 pi. This is nothing but r e to the I theta e to the 2 pi I. Okay, e to the 2 pi I is, so let's now write f of z is nothing but r to the half e to the I theta by 2. I have to take z to the half, right? That is f of z. So e to the I pi, 2 pi I by 2 is I pi, but e to the I pi is nothing but minus 1. It is cos pi plus I sin pi. Cos pi is minus 1. So f of z has now become minus r to the half e to the I theta by 2 when theta is between 2 pi and 4 pi. When theta is between 0 and 2 pi, f of z was r e to the I theta by 2. Now if I go from 4 pi to 6 pi, then f of z will again go back to r e to the I theta by 2. So maybe what I'll do is jumble this a bit. Okay, let me select a rectangle and sort of move it around a little bit. Okay, so first you have the original first round. Sorry about this, I'm just learning these things. So this is the first value of z. Now this is the second value. Right? Now this is the third value. Let me write this again. When theta is between (4 pi and 6 pi), f of z will again become, this is r to the half e to the I theta by 2 and so on. It gets repeated. Now the key thing that you have to understand is all this multiple valued of nature of f of z happens only if you circle the origin. Right? If I were to go to this same complex plane, if I were to take this point and then if I do a circle, right? Now imagine you take a point, sorry about this, you take a point here and then you take a point here, right? As you go around, this is theta is measured with respect to the x-axis. So this is theta, let's say theta 1, and let's say this, the upper angle is theta 2. Remember that this is theta 1, same with this, right? When you go around, you're not going around and making an angle of 2 pi, right? That happens only if you go around the origin. If you don't go around the origin, then the function is not multiple valued. So the origin is called the branch point of this function. The branch point of f of z is z to the half is z is equal to 0. This is So this is very, very important to understand, right? Now the number of times you have to go around to bring the function back to its original value depends on the nature of the function. Here we have to go only 2 times. Okay, sorry. In this particular case, what we did was we had to go once in the z plane and then one more time, and then the third time you went around, you didn't find anything new. So only 2 times are required to go back to the original value of the function, right? But in other functions, suppose I have f of z is equal to z to the 1 by n, you have to do n loops or n circuits before you return to the original value of the function. Value of the function. Indeed, if f of z is ln z, the multiple valued function, you will never return to the original value of the function because the logarithm has infinitely many values, right, as we just saw, if you don't restrict itself to the principal value. So the key question, if amidst all this multivaluedness and the complexities that arises with this, is how to keep f of z single valued. This is one of the main points in complex analysis. So what we do is, let's again take the case of the previous example. You know that this is a branch point, the origin is a branch point. Okay, now you should make sure that you don't come back and cross this again, right? So one of the simplest things to do is that you draw what is called a branch cut from the origin directed towards the x infinity along the x-axis, and agree that you don't cross this. Okay, so this is one of the most important okay, so this is called a branch cut because this is your, if you draw this branch cut from the branch point, right, and then you agree not to cross this branch cut, then the function will remain single valued. For the function f of z is z to the half or even z to the 1 over n or ln z, the origin is a branch point. So you can draw a line from the origin to infinity along the positive real axis. That can be a branch cut, but that's not the only possibility. You can draw many branch cuts, you can, and then stick to that, right? So you can also draw, I'm sorry about this, you can also draw from the origin any ray towards infinity in the complex plane, and that can also serve equally as a branch cut. Okay, so that is something that that's a freedom that you have, but typically you choose the simplest possible branch cut so that the function remains single valued in you know, in the complex plane, right? This is the idea of a branch cut. Now let me just illustrate this with another example. Suppose I have a function f of z is square root of z squared plus 1, then this is nothing but square root of z plus I, z minus I, right? So there are, this is simply z plus I times z minus I. Now trivially, previously when I had f of z is z to the half, the branch point was at the origin. Now there are, let me draw the now there are 2 points, z is equal to plus I and z is equal to minus I. Okay, and both these are branch points because you have a square root of, see, you can think of z minus z naught to the half, and when z naught was 0, that was a branch point. When now z naught is plus I or minus I, then that becomes the branch point. So there are 2 branch points, right? So let's say we write z minus I as r1 e to the I theta 1 and z plus I as r2 e to the I theta 2, right, in order to make further progress with this. Now f of z is square root of r1 r2 e to the I theta 1 by 2 e to the I theta 2 by 2. I am just simply substituting the polar representation in the function, the value of the original expression. What is the original expression? Z minus I to the half. Okay, this implies this. So this is nothing but r1 r2 to the power half, which is completely real, e to the I theta 1 plus theta 2 upon 2. Now if C encloses, if I take a contour C, a closed contour C, C is a closed contour, if C, so let's consider three cases. If C encloses only, okay, if C, let's take the simplest case, okay, if C encloses neither Z is equal to plus I or Z is equal to minus I, okay, C is not enclosing either of the two, then what will happen is that regardless of if theta 1 goes, it's like this, so right, you have these 2 points and let's say you have a contour here, okay, even if I go around many times, theta 1 will always remain theta 1. After many circles, theta 2 will remain theta 2. So the function will remain single valued if you are not encircling these two branch points. Okay, so that is something that that I have told you even before. For f of z is z to the half. Suppose C encloses, second case, C encloses z is equal to minus I but not z is equal to plus I. That is, theta 1 will remain theta 1 but theta 2 will go to, sorry, theta 1 will go to theta 1 plus 2 pi, because I am encircling this, the first, see, I have written z minus I as r1 times e to the I theta 1. So if I am encircling this branch point, then that theta will take, it will increase in its value to 2 pi, whereas theta 2 will remain theta 2. What will happen to f of z after one circle, right, about z is equal to plus I and not minus I, then f of z will become minus f of z. Similarly, if C encloses only z is equal to plus I, oh sorry, I think I changed, okay, sorry about this. See, here I was supposed to say z is equal to I and not z is equal to minus I. See, let me just clarify this. When I wrote z minus I am expanding about z minus z naught, right? So z naught is I here. So this corresponds to this point and this corresponds to this point. Okay, sorry about the slip here. Okay, so here what I am doing is, when C is enclosing the top singularity, top branch cut and not the bottom branch cut, here C encloses only z is equal to plus I, not, so here the other way around, C encloses z is equal to minus I, not z is equal to I, then theta 1 will remain theta 1, theta 2 will remain theta 2 plus 2 pi. Okay, so here f of z will again become minus f of z. But curiously, if C encloses both I and minus I, then f of z will remain f of z, because there are two negatives will now become positive. So how will you draw the branch cuts here? Okay, let me draw the branch points first. Again, for your benefit, there are two branch points at z is equal to I and z is equal to minus I. What are the two branch cuts that are possible? One is to say that you go from this and all the way to infinity, and you go from this to all the way to infinity. So if I don't include either of the two, right, then I will have this is definitely, this is going to give you a single valued representation, because I can do this, or I can also do this. Sorry. So these are the two singularities, or I can say between these 2 points I will draw a branch cut and agree not to cross this. Okay, basically you can agree not to cross this, and then you can cross this, it will be regular, or now you can cross this, right, it will be regular. But basically you should not cross this. You can also do this. Okay, as long as you are not crossing this point, you are doing okay. Okay, so this is the way one constructs branch cuts in order for you to keep yourself within the domains where the function is single valued. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here in this module, and in the next module I'll start with complex integrals. Thank you.